Rowan, what would you like to give to the museum?
Sally, I would like to present a saucy limerick, which I think will dignify the museum in many ways. So I would say the saucy limerick summarises a lot of things that I think are very important, because it is at its best actually a very fine form of poetry. I would argue right up there with Byron and Milton. And, you know, when it really scans properly and someone has spent a whole month perfecting those lines. And the value of the smutty limerick is that it sort of summarises all that stuff that's sort of rather innocent in the British way of thinking about sex, that is sort of, in the end, essentially full of humour, fear, embarrassment.
And a rather disappointing ending.
The most brilliant ending, the sort of perfect last line,
What's
that
your
climactic
favourite?
moment. I can't do my favourite because it's a little bit too rude for Radio 4, but my second favourite, and I think it's so elegant. An old Buddhist joiner from Ware liked buttocks, inviting and bare. As some compensation at his reincarnation, he returned as a cane-bottomed chair.
Who invented the limerick?
It certainly wasn't, you know, as everyone thinks, Edward Lear. He just sort of popularised it. But we don't know. Doesn't it go right back to St Thomas Aquinas? Don't people accuse him that's really a bit of Latin verse? But, I mean, everyone crops up in terms of limericks. So people say Shakespeare did one. And, you know, but I think they weren't really popular until the 19th century. I think that's when we can firmly say.
St Thomas Aquinas, I mean, 13th century limerick. I mean, this is so funny. Sit vitiorum meorum evacuatio, compis cucentae et libidinis exterminatio, caritatis et patientae, humilitatis et libidientae, omnium qui virtutem augmentatio.
Do you think the best limericks are slightly pervy?
I think everyone agrees on this. Apparently, luminaries no less than Arnold Bennett. There's been a lot of discussion of it, and there's a feeling they should be just slightly transgressive. I think they had a sort of saying that there were sort of limericks that you could do if women were there, and then there were ones you could do if they weren't there, but clergymen were present, and then there were limericks. I don't know whether anyone remembers this sale of Ronnie Barker's effects. As Ronnie Barker had a collection of Edward Lear's limericks, and he'd sort of just looked at them and thought, these are a bit rubbish. Why would you repeat the first line and the last line? That's not good enough. So he'd gone through the whole book annotating them and improving them and had a little limerick at the front to say what he'd done. And it was auctioned for £3,600.
His introductory limerick read, "There was an old fossil named Lear whose verses were boring and drear. His last lines were worst, just the same as the first, so I've tried to improve on them here."
Do you know any sciencey limericks, Paul?
Well, I've got one here on cell biology and actually about reproduction of cells, really. I think it's really quite good. The daughter cells said, "We admit to being confused just a bit. We've no father or brother, and it seems that our mother has quite unexpectedly split."
How are we going to display the limericks? What do you reckon?
Well, the natural place for a limerick is when you've had a couple of pints, and there should be lots of bits of paper over this installation pub in the museum. So you can go in, you can sit down, you can have a drink, and you can start writing your own limerick. And there will just be a sort of performance installation. And you might also have a very comely barmaid, probably Barbara Windsor, actually. And she will have tattooed this limerick. "On the breast of a barmaid from Sale was tattooed the price of her ale. And on her behind, for the sake of the blind, the same information in braille."
Well, thank you so much, Rowan. And to finish, here's a limerick that doesn't cross any of Radio 4's guidelines, but does challenge the boundaries of poetry. A forgetful old gas man named Dieter was poking around a gas heater, touched a leak with his light and blew out of sight, and as everyone knows anything about poetry can tell you, he also ruined the meter. So